The dinner that changed everything. The Sterling estate sat on the edge of the city like a fortress of wealth and silence. Gleaming glass walls reflected the lights of New York's skyline, while security gates kept out the curious eyes of the world. Inside, the air carried the faint aroma of rosemary and roasted meat, the kind of expensive meal that only the finest chefs could prepare. It was supposed to be a celebration. Henry Sterling, the millionaire CEO of Sterling Enterprises, was hosting a private dinner for his family. The occasion was simple. His twins, Emma and Claire, had just turned 13. On the surface, the night looked perfect. Crystal glasses lined the dining table. Chandeliers spilled golden light across polished marble floors, and every detail had been meticulously arranged. But for Henry, perfection wasn't an option. It was a necessity. His empire, his reputation, his family image, all had to remain spotless. Emma and Claire were identical in appearance, both with their mother's auburn hair and their father's sharp, calculating blue eyes. But where Emma carried herself with a quiet elegance, Claire was fiery, outspoken, and stubborn. To Henry, they weren't just daughters. They were future heirs to his empire. And heirs had to be perfect. The family gathered at the long dining table. Henry at the head, his wife Victoria at his right, and the twins across from each other. The servants moved silently in the background, setting dishes of roasted lamb, asparagus, and red wine sauce. "Eat," Henry said, his voice firm but calm. "It's a special night." Emma picked up her fork obediently, cutting small bites of lamb. Claire, however, just stared at her plate. She pressed her lips together, her small hands gripping the silverware but refusing to move. Victoria noticed first. "Claire, darling," she said softly, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier's glow. "Is something wrong?" Claire shook her head. "I'm not hungry." Henry's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to her plate, then back to her face. "Not hungry?" He let out a cold laugh. "That's ridiculous. It's your birthday dinner. You'll eat." But Claire didn't move. She just sat there, her body stiff, eyes defiant. The silence stretched uncomfortably across the table. Emma kept her gaze lowered, carefully avoiding her sister's eyes. Victoria's fingers tapped lightly against her wine glass. Finally, Henry leaned forward. His voice dropped to a sharp whisper. "Don't embarrass me in my own home. Pick up your fork and eat." Claire's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. "I said I'm not hungry." The words were soft, but they cut through the air like broken glass. Henry's face reddened. He wasn't a man used to defiance. His employees obeyed him. His board respected him. His competitors feared him. But here, in his own home, his own daughter dared to challenge him. Victoria quickly tried to smooth things over. "Henry, she's just tired. It's been a long day. We don't need to." "Enough," Henry snapped, slamming his hand against the table. The crystal glasses rattled. Emma flinched. Claire's face drained of color, but she still didn't touch her fork. The servants froze at the edges of the room, waiting for a cue. Nobody moved. And then, with a trembling voice, Claire whispered, "I don't want to eat because I know something's wrong." The words stunned the room. Even Henry blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her gaze steady. "The food. It's not the food. It's everything. You keep pretending we're this perfect family. But it's not real. And I don't want to pretend anymore." Her fork clattered against the plate as she pushed it away. The silence that followed was suffocating. Victoria's eyes darted nervously toward her husband, terrified of what he might say. Emma's hands shook under the table. Henry's jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might shatter. But behind his fury, a flicker of unease appeared in his eyes. Because for the first time, he wasn't just facing a stubborn child. He was facing the cracks in the perfect facade he had built. And Claire, the daughter who wouldn't eat, had just exposed them. That night, Henry dismissed the servants early. The rest of the family sat in the grand living room, the firelight casting long shadows against the walls. You embarrassed me, Henry said, his voice low but venomous. He wasn't shouting anymore. He didn't need to. His calm anger was far more terrifying. Claire sat curled on the sofa, her knees drawn to her chest. I wasn't trying to. Yes, you were. His eyes bore into her. Do you think people don't notice? Do you think word won't spread? If anyone learns that the Sterling twins aren't perfect, it damages us all. It damages me. Emma finally spoke up, her voice trembling. She's not trying to hurt anyone, Dad. She's just... Quiet, Henry snapped. Emma fell silent instantly. Victoria tried again, her voice almost pleading. Henry, please. He's a child. Maybe she's going through something. But Henry raised a hand to silence her. His gaze never left Claire. You will eat. You will smile. And you will never embarrass me again. Do you understand? Claire's lips quivered. She nodded. But even in that small, frightened gesture, there was something else in her eyes. Something Henry didn't notice. Defiance. Because Claire wasn't just refusing food. She was refusing control. And Henry Sterling, the man who controlled everything, was about to face the one thing he couldn't control. His own daughter. The sun spilled through the glass walls of the Sterling estate the next morning, but the house was colder than ever. The aroma of fresh croissants, eggs, and fruit filled the kitchen, prepared by the family's private chef. Everything looked beautiful, perfectly arranged on the polished oak table. Henry Sterling walked in dressed in a crisp navy suit, already looking like he was ready to face board meetings and billion-dollar deals. For him, mornings were about control. A smooth start, a perfect image. Emma sat quietly with her plate, nibbling on a piece of toast. Her eyes kept flickering toward her sister, already anticipating the storm she knew was coming. And there was Claire. She sat stiffly in her chair, her small hands folded on the table. Her plate was full, fluffy eggs, ripe strawberries, a golden croissant. But she didn't touch it. Victoria tried to start with warmth. Good morning, darlings. Eat before it gets cold. Her voice was soft, but underneath it was the tension of a woman who spent her life smoothing over her husband's temper. Emma obediently lifted her fork. But Claire didn't move. Henry noticed immediately. His jaw flexed as he set down his coffee cup. Not again. Claire swallowed hard. Her voice came out small but steady. I told you. I don't want to eat. The chef, sensing danger, quickly excused himself from the room. Emma froze, her toast halfway to her mouth. Victoria reached for her glass of orange juice, pretending not to notice the flames building in her husband's eyes. Henry leaned forward. Claire. Enough of this nonsense. You're embarrassing yourself. Eat. I'm not hungry, she repeated, her eyes shining but unyielding. The silence that followed was louder than shouting. Henry slowly stood, towering over her small frame. His voice dropped, sharp and precise. You think this is about hunger. You think this is about food. Well, this is about respect. About discipline. And you will not make a mockery of this family. Claire's chair scraped back suddenly as she stood. Her hands trembling but her chin lifted. It's not about the food. It's about you. You can't control everything, Dad. The words hit him harder than he expected. For a moment, his breath caught in his throat. No one talked to Henry Sterling like that. Not employees, not rivals, not even board members who'd known him for decades. And now his own daughter, his heir, was standing there, refusing him in the most public way possible, even if the only witnesses were her mother and twin. Victoria placed a trembling hand on Henry's arm. Please, Henry. He's a child. We can talk about this calmly. But Henry brushed her hand away. His voice was steel. If she wants to test me, then she'll learn what defiance costs. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to say something to protect her twin, but fear sealed her lips. And then, for the second meal in a row, Claire pushed her untouched plate away. The sound of porcelain sliding across wood was louder than thunder. Henry's hands curled into fists, But behind his rage flickered something he didn't want to admit. Fear. Because in that moment, he realized this wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't a phase. This was a war. And for the first time in his life, Henry Sterling wasn't sure he could win. By the third day, the Sterling mansion no longer felt like home. It felt like a battlefield. Every meal was a negotiation. Every silence was loaded with unspoken words. Claire still refused to eat. Her small frame was already showing signs of weakness, but her eyes remained sharp, determined. Henry, who had built an empire from nothing, could not understand how a 10-year-old girl could outmaneuver him. Emma grew quieter each day, caught between loyalty to her twin and terror of her father's temper. She watched Claire push plates away, watched her father's knuckles whiten, and felt her own stomach churn with anxiety. Victoria, exhausted, finally put her foot down. "Henry, this isn't discipline anymore. She hasn't eaten properly in days. We need help." Henry slammed his hand against the marble counter. "Help? You mean doctors, therapists, strangers poking into our business?" "Yes," Victoria snapped, her voice trembling but firm. "Because if we don't, Henry, she's going to get worse. This isn't about appearances. It's about her life." For once, Henry didn't argue back. His reflection in the glass wall looked less like a CEO and more like a man losing control of the one thing that mattered most: his family. That afternoon, Dr. Matthews, the family physician, was called. A kind man in his 50s with gentle eyes. He greeted Claire softly, kneeling so he was eye level. "Claire," he said, smiling, "can you tell me why you don't want to eat?" Claire hugged her knees on the sofa, refusing to answer. Emma sat close, her small hand brushing against her sister's, silently telling her she wasn't alone. Henry stood in the corner, arms folded, glaring like this was a corporate negotiation he planned to win. After a long silence, Claire finally whispered, "Because it's the only thing I can control." The words pierced the air. Even Emma gasped softly. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. But Henry only scoffed. "Control. She's a child. She doesn't understand what she's saying." Dr. Matthews turned to Henry, his tone measured but firm. "With respect, Mr. Sterling, she understands more than you think. Children don't stop eating for no reason. This is about something deeper. Stress, fear, maybe even something she's seen or experienced that she can't express." Claire's small voice trembled. "You never listen. None of you do." Her eyes locked on her father. "You just decide everything for us. For me. For Emma. For Mum. You don't care what we want." The room went still. Victoria reached out, but Claire shook her head, tears rolling down her pale cheeks. "If I eat, it's like saying you win. And I don't want you to win anymore." Henry's face reddened with fury, but behind it was something he couldn't hide: panic. For the first time in his life, Henry Sterling wasn't facing a business rival or a hostile takeover. He was facing his own child and losing. The doctor stood, his expression grave. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, this isn't a phase. This is serious. If she continues, it could be life-threatening. You need to decide. Are you going to keep treating this like disobedience, or are you going to face what's really happening in this family?" Claire buried her face in her arms. Emma held her tighter, whispering, "I'm here. I'll always be here." And Henry Sterling, the man who had conquered boardrooms and beaten billionaires, suddenly realized he was powerless against the truth that lived under his own roof. The Sterling mansion was unusually quiet that night. Dinner had ended in yet another failure. Claire had refused the carefully plated meal, and Henry had stormed out before dessert. Victoria cried silently in the kitchen, her shoulders shaking as she rinsed untouched plates. Emma, however, couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of the house. Claire was curled beside her, her breaths shallow but steady, a faint whimper escaping every now and then. Emma brushed her sister's hair back, whispering softly, "It's going to be okay, Claire. I'll protect you." But in truth, Emma was terrified. Around midnight, when the house seemed dead still, Emma slipped out of bed for a glass of water. She tiptoed past the hallway portraits, grand images of her father shaking hands with presidents, standing atop skyscrapers, looking every bit the man who ruled the world. But behind closed doors, the same man couldn't reach his own daughter. As Emma descended the grand staircase, voices drifted from her father's office. The door was slightly ajar, light spilling into the hallway. She froze, clutching the railing, her small body hidden by the shadows. Henry's deep voice rumbled first. "She's making me look weak, Victoria. Do you understand what this does to my image? The board already senses something's wrong. If word gets out that my daughter refuses to eat, they'll see me as a man who can't even control his own family." Victoria's voice cracked. "Henry, this isn't about your board. This is about Claire's life. She's hurting. Can't you see that?" But Henry snapped back colder this time. "She's a child. Children don't get to control the narrative. I built this empire, and I won't have it crumble because my daughter throws a tantrum." Emma's chest tightened. Her father wasn't worried about Claire. He was worried about himself. Victoria, her tone trembling but fierce, said something that made Emma's heart pound. "Maybe if you didn't push her so hard, if you didn't treat her like one of your employees, she wouldn't feel trapped. She wouldn't have to starve herself to be heard." A heavy silence followed. Emma pressed her hand to her mouth, her mind racing. Was that it? Was Claire starving herself not because she hated food, but because it was the only way to fight back against father's control? Then Henry's voice dropped to a near growl. "Don't you dare blame me. Everything I do is for this family. Everything. And if Claire keeps this up, she'll leave me no choice but to send her away." Emma's knees went weak. Send her away. She hurried back upstairs, her tiny feet silent against the carpet. Slipping into bed beside her twin, she wrapped her arms tightly around Claire, who stirred slightly in her sleep. Emma's voice trembled as she whispered into her sister's ear. "I heard him, Claire. He wants to send you away. But I won't let him. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." For the first time in days, Claire opened her eyes, though barely. Her lips parted in the faintest whisper. "Promise." Emma pressed her forehead against hers. "Promise." And as the storm outside rattled the mansion windows, Emma realized something terrifying. Her father wasn't just losing control. He was willing to do whatever it took to regain it, even if that meant tearing the twins apart. The rain had not stopped all night. By morning, the Sterling mansion felt heavy, as if the storm had seeped into its walls. Emma barely slept, her father's words echoing in her mind. "I'll send her away." She watched Claire's frail body curled under the blankets, every shallow breath a reminder of how fragile she had become. When breakfast was served in the sunlit dining room, the usual perfection of Sterling mornings was broken. Claire sat slouched in her chair, her eyes dull, pushing her food around without lifting a bite. Henry entered, immaculately dressed, his tie knotted with precision. His presence filled the room, demanding silence. "Claire," he said, his voice smooth but laced with steel, "enough of this nonsense. Today you will eat." Emma's hand tightened around her fork. She glanced at her twin, who looked like she might dissolve under his gaze. "I'm not hungry," Claire whispered, almost inaudible. The words hung in the air like a match over dry kindling. Henry slammed his palm on the table, making the china rattle. "Not hungry. Do you think the world cares if you're hungry? Do you think investors excuse weakness? This family does not get to fall apart because you feel like playing games." Victoria flinched, her hand halfway to Claire's shoulder. But Henry's glare stopped her cold. Then he made his announcement. Calm, deliberate, final. "Starting tomorrow, Claire will be enrolled at Rosehill Academy." Emma's stomach dropped. Rosehill wasn't a school. It was a correctional facility disguised as one. Everyone in the city knew the rumors. Strict discipline, silent meals, endless drills. Children who entered Rosehill returned hollow-eyed and obedient. "No!" Emma burst out before she could stop herself. Her chair screeched against the floor. You can't send her there. She's not bad, she's sick. She needs help, not punishment. Henry's eyes narrowed, gray and merciless. Enough, Emma. This isn't your decision. Claire has made her choice not to eat. If she won't listen to us here, she'll learn to listen somewhere else. Emma looked at her twin. Claire's eyes brimmed with tears, but she said nothing, her silence heavier than any scream. Henry, Victoria's voice trembled, but she spoke anyway. This will destroy her. She doesn't need Rosehill. She needs discipline, Henry snapped. And if none of you have the courage to enforce it, then I will. Emma's chest burned with fury. She wanted to shout that this wasn't discipline. It was cruelty. She wanted to tell him that she had heard everything last night, that she knew he cared more about his reputation than his daughter. But one look at his face told her the truth. Words would not change him. So she swallowed her anger and made a silent vow. If her father was determined to send Claire away, then Emma would do whatever it took to stop him. She didn't know how yet. But she had one night, just one night, to protect her twin. That evening, when the house settled into uneasy quiet, Emma crept to Claire's bedside. She held her hand, thin and cold, and whispered, "I won't let him take you. Tomorrow he thinks he wins, but we'll find a way. We'll fight back." Claire opened her eyes weakly, searching Emma's face for hope. And though Emma's heart quivered with fear, she smiled and squeezed her hand. Because sisters didn't break promises. And she had promised. The night before Claire's supposed transfer to Rosehill Academy was thick with silence. Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every thunderclap outside pulling her deeper into dread. She couldn't just sit and wait while her father tore her twin from her side. She had to act. When the house finally slept, Emma slipped from her bed and padded barefoot down the long, echoing corridor. Her destination was clear, her father's study. Henry Sterling's study was forbidden territory. Oak-paneled, always locked, filled with the aura of power and secrets. But Emma had been watching him for weeks. She knew where he kept the spare key, hidden behind the portrait of their grandfather. Her hands shook as she fit the key into the lock. The door creaked open, spilling her into the cavern of polished wood and glass. She moved toward the mahogany desk. On top lay neatly arranged ledgers, but it was the bottom drawer, locked, that caught her attention. With trembling persistence, she rifled through the room until she found the small brass key tucked inside a leather-bound book. The drawer opened with a reluctant click. Inside were files, thick folders stamped with company seals. Emma's eyes scanned page after page, her breath growing shallow. These weren't just financial documents. They were records of cover-ups. Toxic spills near low-income neighborhoods, employees silenced with payouts, and most horrifyingly, medical studies linked to Sterling Corp's nutritional supplements. Her hands froze on one file stamped confidential. Subjects 27. She flipped it open. Photographs spilled out, of children pale and frail, hooked up to machines. Notes scrawled across the margin spoke of controlled fasting response, behavioral modification through deprivation, and potential for consumer conditioning. Emma's stomach twisted. Her father's company hadn't just been selling wellness products. They had been experimenting. And Claire's refusal to eat. It wasn't random. It had begun right after Henry insisted she try one of his new supplement regimens. Emma's head spun. Her twin wasn't rebelling. She was a victim. The study detailed symptoms identical to Claire's: loss of appetite, lethargy, dependency. And there on the final page a chilling phrase: subject results promising for mass influence. Risk: psychological trauma. Emma's throat tightened with rage. Her father wasn't just sending Claire away to discipline her. He was covering up his crime. Behind her the door creaked. Couldn't sleep. Emma froze. Her father stood in the doorway, shadows slicing across his face. He wasn't angry. He was calm, almost amused. "You should have stayed in bed, Emma," he said softly, stepping closer. "Now you know too much." Emma clutched the file to her chest. Her pulse thundered. This wasn't just about saving Claire anymore. This was about exposing the man who had destroyed lives, including their own. But Henry Sterling wasn't about to let his empire crumble without a fight. With the truth in her hands and her father closing in, Emma had one chance to save her twin and bring down the empire built on secrets. Emma's pulse hammered as Henry stepped into the study, the storm outside echoing the storm inside her chest. She clutched the file tighter, every instinct screaming to run, yet her feet remained rooted. "You've built your empire on lies," she spat, her voice shaking but fierce. "Claire isn't broken. You poisoned her." Henry tilted his head, as if amused by her defiance. "Poison? Well, innovation. Do you know how much power there is in controlling hunger? In deciding when people eat what they eat?" Claire was unfortunate, sensitive. But sacrifices must be made for greatness. Emma's stomach twisted. He wasn't just ruthless. He believed his own madness. Behind him, a soft voice broke the tension. "Emma!" Claire stood at the doorway, pale and fragile, yet her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She must have woken and followed them. Her gaze darted between her twin and their father. Henry's mask slipped for the first time. He stepped toward Claire, voice soothing like a snake coiling around prey. "Sweetheart, you don't understand. Everything I do for us. For this family." "No," Emma snapped, blocking his path. "You do it for yourself. For your name, your power. But not for us." Henry's calm facade cracked. His voice sharpened, slicing the air. "Give me the file, Emma. Now." For a heartbeat, Emma hesitated. Then she did something reckless. She turned to Claire and pressed the folder into her hands. "Run. Get this to Mom." Claire's eyes widened. "But, run," Emma shouted. Claire bolted, clutching the evidence like a lifeline. Henry cursed and lunged after her, but Emma threw herself in his path, blocking him. His rage exploded. He grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. "You stupid, foolish girl. You think you can destroy me?" Emma's fear ignited into fury. She had always been the quiet twin, the overlooked one. But tonight she became unbreakable. She met his eyes and hissed, "Watch me." The commotion drew Victoria from her bedroom. She appeared at the top of the stairs just as Claire stumbled into her arms, sobbing and handing her the file. Victoria's face blanched as she flipped through the damning evidence. Henry froze. His wife's expression told him what Emma already knew. His empire was finished. Victoria's voice was cold steel. "Henry, what have you done?" The man who once commanded boardrooms and governments stood silent, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. By dawn, lawyers and police swarmed the Sterling mansion. The story spread like wildfire. Sterling Corp's experiments, the cover-ups, the CEO who had gambled with children's lives. Henry Sterling was led away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling in the daylight. Emma sat by Claire's side as doctors examined her, promising recovery with proper care. For the first time in weeks, Claire managed a tiny smile, weak but real. "You saved me," she whispered. Emma squeezed her hand. "No, we saved each other." As the storm clouds broke and sunlight pierced through, Emma knew their lives would never be the same. But she also knew this. The darkness that had haunted their family was finally gone. And in its place, two sisters stood stronger than ever, bound not just by blood, but by survival.